There will be explanation and reputation because I'm going to show you today how I made this suit today. Just kidding, this took me 4 months and some of those days were actually spent sewing. So obviously to make something like this, we're going to need things to make the thing out of. So for fabric, you are going to need 2 yards of a sequin fabric, 2 yards of a lining, and just 1 yard of a mesh fabric. Also make sure all of the fabric is a 4-way stretch or else you probably won't like wearing this outfit. And yes, you will also need the mesh up top to be a stretchy fabric also. Very important. You are also going to need a 22-inch zipper, a hook and eye unless you're lazy, and also a 1/4 of an inch with elastic, and that's pretty much it. But what about the snakes? Lastly, you will need snakes. I got mine from a variety of places. I will have everything linked down below, of course, including the fabric I'm using, and I got it all from Blue Moon Fabric, and I also, you're welcome, have a code for 10% off if you just use the code Kenzie10. To begin, we're going to need a pattern, and lucky for you, I actually have one already out. If you want to make one yourself, it comes with a booklet and all of these pieces, and also you'll see on here the snake guidelines, which really came in handy even for me. But before we get to the snake guidelines, we're first going to start off by doing our darts, and I'm just taking an X-Acto knife, cutting out that shape so then we're able to trace it right onto the wrong side. For the sequin fabric, make sure you are turning around your fabric and your pattern to mark these out so you put them on the right side. But before we sew them, now we're going to mark out these snake guidelines. And this is why using my pattern would really help, because let me tell you, later on when I'm doing the snakes, you'll see it gets a little crazy, so having all of these guidelines is so helpful. So I'm just doing it in sections, actually just cutting with an X-Acto knife and marking it with a tailor's wax. And what I mean by doing it in sections is it gets a little crazy at these junctions, and so I'm working top to bottom and taping it up as I do these little sections at a time. And once I have all of those sections marked and all the snakes ready to go, I'm just going over all of those lines with a basting stitch in a contrasting colored thread, just so the lines don't go away over time. Now switch back to your black thread and your 2.5 stitch length and sew up the darts. The important thing when it comes to these darts is to make sure you press them really well so they lay flat. I'm just using my tailor ham here, and it really helps with this process. Alright, so today is lining day. That means we need to open the can of worms. That is asymmetry. When it comes to putting a lining in for something that's asymmetrical, it means you have to make sure you cut it not only on the right side of the fabric, but you put the darts on the right side of the fabric, because it has to mirror the sequin fabric, if that makes sense. So if something is cut one way, it has to be cut the other to work as a lining. When we cut the fabric out on the sequin, you're going to cut it with the pattern facing up and the sequin facing up as well. When you cut out the lining, the pattern piece will still be up, so you'll still see all the red snake details there, but your lining fabric will be upside down, so wrong side facing up. And then instead of unpinning and then flipping around your pattern like we did for the sequin, you're just going to keep the pattern as is and trace straight onto your piece of fabric. Once those are marked out, then you get to sew them as normal. And then of course we gotta be basic and press open our dart seams. And now it's time to assemble the bodysuit. We're going to be doing both the lining and the sequin fabric at the same time. So first you see we're gonna sew up the center front and the center back seams, making sure for the center back that we stop at that zipper notch. You can also see I did some clipping at the crotch seams just to help alleviate that curve there. That sounds really weird, but the clipping there you see helps. And now it's time to do the inner leg seam. I just started by lining up the crotch seams together there and then pinning all the way down the leg. And again, remember we're doing this for the lining and also the sequin fabric. And also we're going to sew up the side seams, so the right and the left seam, and then at this point you'll be able to try on your bodysuit and see how everything is fitting. Hello, let's play a game called Slideshows, right Moxie? Yeah, we're gonna talk about now how to do the mesh. And I didn't get any video of this part because I was too excited, and so I'm going to show you through the pictures I got how to do it. So for the mesh, you only need to cut one for the front, the 2 different back pieces, and also the sleeve. The only thing you'll cut 2 of is the collar. And speaking of the collar, that's where we're going to start for the assembly process. So for the collar, put right sides together and you're going to sew up the smallest part of the macaroni, if that makes sense. I'll put it right there for you. Make sure you're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance for there. You'll notice that with the mesh, there are different seam allowances. It's noted in the book, but also you can tell just by looking at the pattern that the stitch line is a little bit closer than normal to the edge of your paper. Once the collar is sewn together, then you're going to sew the front pieces to the back pieces at the shoulder seams and also under that one armpit seam as well. Once you have those sewn and also pressed open, so ironing open those seams, you're ready to put on the collar. And how you do that is you're going to put right sides together, but make sure you're only putting the right side together of one side of that collar. And once you have that sewn and also pressed, you are ready to do something that's really awesome, and it's called finishing it on the inside. Woo! And how you do that is you just fold under 1/2 inch on that other edge, and once you have that fold and also pressed, you're going to sew it. And how I did it is I hand sewed it actually, but you could totally just run it under your machine. I didn't realize at the time that the snakes are going to cover it, so it doesn't matter how you sew that fold under. And now we are ready to move on to the sleeve. This has been the game of slideshows. I hope we don't have to play this ever again. Alright, so for the sleeve, we're first going to mark out the snake again onto the fabric, and we're also going to go ahead and put the actual snake onto the fabric. So we're going to cut out that guideline again and mark it out with our wax, and then we are ready to put the snake onto the fabric. Welcome back to slideshows. For this step, all you need to do is hem your sleeve before you do the snakes, because you want to make sure that your little snake head goes on the hem, and also when you do the hem, make sure you leave room in the hem for the elastic. And so you just fold it up 1/2 inch, do a little zigzag right on that raw edge just like this, and you're golden. And now you're ready to go. This has been slideshows. Let's not do this again. So this is how I like to do the trim for this outfit. I just start from one point, and again I'm going to start from 5/8 away, or actually more like 1 inch just to be safe, and start my trim kind of right there, and I'm going to work the glue. And I usually do about 4 or 5 inches of glue at first, and then go and place it. And this is just so I have like ultimate control of what I'm doing. So just like that, and I am on something that I don't mind getting dirty underneath because this is see-through fabric. For the heads of the snakes, I just use different kinds of rhinestones. So I have a square one, a teardrop one, and 7 of those circle ones. And I put them in a configuration kind of like that. And then once that's done, it's time to just put on the rhinestone trim around the entire snake. And for this, I decided to do it very meticulously and put on the glue with a needle. This actually was a lot of time, but I wanted to make sure for the sleeve that I didn't get any glue burn, aka like any glue like hanging off the sides or any accidents. So I took my time, and yes, this took forever, but it definitely paid off. Welcome back to slideshows. I promise I know what I'm doing. I just didn't record it, okay? I'm a failed YouTuber. So to finish off the sleeve, you first have to cut out the elastic that goes in the hem. And once you have the elastic in the hem, now you're ready to sew up the side seam of the sleeve. Fold it like a hot dog, right sides together, sew it up, and once you have that and you press it open, then you're going to put it into the mesh, and all you have to do again is put right sides together and sew around the arm's eye hole like this, and you're golden. And this has been slideshows for the last time, I promise. Maybe. To finish the mesh, we need to finish the other shoulder that does not have the sleeve, and how we do that is you just fold the mesh inward by 1/2 inch and zigzag that elastic right onto it like this. And now it's time to put on the mesh. You'll see you just put right sides together, and we're going to sew them at that neckline. I did leave open that center point and came back to it just because it is really tricky. Also pay attention when you're doing the back, just because it is really weird and it's different on both sides, but also for this side that has the elastic, so that arm opening, make sure it starts 5/8 of an inch on the sequence so the lining can go in. Now is the time to do something that's always a little scary for me, someone who's clumsy, and that is clip excess seam allowance for our mesh. I have everything put on, so I have the mesh and everything ready to go, but you see how it's so thick right here, the seam allowance? I don't want it to be that thick. It is 5/8 seam allowance, so this is right, but now I need to clip the excess maybe down to like 1/4 of an inch or so it's not as thick here. So baby scissors, and I'm just gonna cut. Ooh, doggy. Okay, these might not be, oh, here we go. Okay. So again, I'm just cutting both layers of the seam allowance. So it's like that. And then what I might do actually is go back over with a zigzag to just cover and go over these raw edges here, and I'm gonna make sure they're nice and smooth. So one of the hardest parts of this bodysuit has definitely been getting that sweetheart neckline and getting that point right in the middle. So I just sewed the whole neckline except for the point, and then I came back and really pinned everything 1,000 times and sewed it. The good news though is that the snakes are gonna cover it, so it's okay that it's not 100% beautiful and all that. Mine's not. Now I'm gonna put the lining on, and then the snakes are gonna go on, and then it's gonna feel so real. I can't wait. Oh my gosh. To assemble the lining, you're just going to pin through all layers with right sides together. That is the sequin, the mesh, and also the lining, of course. And then once you have that all pinned together, I would leave out the center front and then come back to it just because that angle there is so tricky. Got my empty pin caddy ready. Let's put this lining on. La, 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 la. And the whole time I'm doing this, I'm just gonna make sure that I don't snag any other layers, and trying to keep all 3 of them flat. And yes, for the back, you're going to have to pull one of these, a little pivot, just so you can get that weird and interesting slant that happens in the back seam. So I just sewed the lining into the bodysuit and it looks really good. Before I move on though, I did check to make sure all of the mesh was laying right and that none of it got snagged into that new seam, and I messed up the center front. Of course, that point is so notoriously difficult. So I'm gonna have to seam rip this and take it out and then retry this part again. So just a tip before you move on, make sure your mesh is perfect or good. So now it's time to clip the seam allowance and also do the understitching. And so the most important thing when it comes to clipping though, for curved seams, is to not cut the stitch line. Don't do it. So this is what it looks like. Also, just make sure you're content with everything before you do this step because there's really no going back. So, yay! After we've done our clipping, it's now time to do our understitching. So this is what it looks like. The mesh and sequin are right here on this side, and then the lining is on this side. And now here comes the important part. The seam allowance, all of them, all 3 layers for this project, are under the foot as well. So let me show you. So this is what the understitching looks like. You'll notice while I'm sewing, I'm actually pulling open that seam just so it gets nice and flat, and also I'm trying to stitch as close as I can to the actual seam itself. This is sewing through a lot of layers, so be sure to go slow with this one. Uh-oh! It's everyone's favorite part, the zipper! I'm just using a 22-inch zipper, and it's gonna go all the way from the bottom all the way up to the top of the neckband. So I'm just using this basic little polyester one, and we're gonna get it done. So how I'm doing the zipper is just sewing the zipper onto the sequin fabric only, so not the lining on the other side, and that just is so we can finish the lining nicely later. But it's a little bit of a problem because we have to then transition from sequin to mesh, and of course the mesh doesn't have any lining and it should just go straight on it. So how we're doing it is just sewing it in parts, so the first part here, and then we'll move the lining over to then sew the zipper onto the mesh. I'm just starting pretty much right where that seam is, doing a back stitch. I'm sewing a little bit away from the teeth just so these sequins don't get into my zipper. And now I'm ready to sew the zipper onto the mesh, and all I'm going to do that is take the lining and pull it down, so now that it can just go right onto the mesh like that. So you're just going to sew on the zipper on the mesh and then repeat it on the other side the same exact way, sewing the zipper in parts. To finish the zipper at the lining section, we're going to first fold under the lining edge by 5/8 of an inch and pin it onto the zipper. And then I just did a little prick stitch, which is basically a little running stitch, and I attached it to the zipper. And also make sure to do your hook and eye. And now we're on to the last step for assembling this Reputation bodysuit, and that is, of course, finishing the leg openings. And how we do that is we're first going to cut out elastic for the shorter leg. And to be sure that I put the elastic on straight, I actually marked the line up about 1 inch from the raw edge, and now it was time to sew the elastic on. I just made sure that the halfway point of the elastic is at the outer portion of the leg, so on the outer seam, and that the ends meet at the crotch. And so I just did a zigzag stitch right on that line to secure it, and now it's time to actually finish the leg whole. So how I did that is I fold under 5/8 of an inch of the sequin, and also I fold under the lining, and then all you have to do is line up the seams. So the inside of the seam seams, the inside crotch seams, and the outside seams, the side seams, and then pin those folds together. And as you see, you do the same thing for the actual pant leg, and then you just put it on your machine and did a little zigzag right on the fold there, and the legs are complete. And now for the main event. So we're going to put the snakes on, but first we need to make sure that the bodysuit is all stretched out how it will be when you're wearing it. So I stuffed the leg with some fabric and I slapped it on to my mannequin. And once we have it on and all evened out, we are ready to begin the snake process. And so I recommend having a picture of Taylor with you at all times because this gets a little tricky. You'll notice from mine, I don't really follow the guidelines because I was actually testing them out. They should work really well for you now. And it's just a lot of prodding and a lot of moving. And I recommend first, of course, doing the main snakes with the silver trim on them. There are 3 snakes in the front of this bodysuit, and I just did them the same way that we did the sleeves. And as a tip, I recommend not doing this. Do not glue anything while your mannequin is upright. I recommend doing all of this while it is laying down flat because you will definitely have less mistakes. Trust me, I made a couple because my mannequin was not laying down. This is, of course, a tip if you are using glue. I really liked using my E600 glue. I bet it saved me about 1,000,000 years because I would have to hand sew not only both of the snakes, but as you see, I lined my rhinestone rectangle trim with the silver trim because I wanted it to look as close to Taylor's as possible. And if I hand sewed it, I know this bodysuit would never get done. And so I really enjoyed the glue. It was a little messy, but I tried to contain it as best I can and just take my time with this process. For the shadow snakes, you'll notice I'm using a sequin trim, which does fray. So for every end of the sequin, that like when I cut it, I made sure to fold down the ends just so they are contained. And once it's all glued in place, it's not going to fray. And so also when you're cutting it, I also cut a little bit extra past the point it needed to end, just so again, I can fold it under like that. I think in total, this bodysuit took me about 3 or 4 days just to do the snakes, and there's no really easy way around that. It's just gonna take some time, but once it's done, it will be amazingly fun to wear. Let me tell you, I am so proud of this outfit, and I hope you get to make one as well. I will say that the glue does not really inhibit my movement. I can still sit and dance and all of those things, but yep, let me know down below if you have any comments and questions, and if you make this, please let me see it. I wanna see your recreation. All right, see you in the next one.